All right, let's dive in. Today we're going to untangle something that I think trips a lot of people up, the whole EU, Schengen, and Eurozone thing.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those topics where you think you've got it and then
Well, yeah.
you realize there's like a whole nother layer.
Absolutely. And honestly, knowing the difference can actually make a big difference if you're ever traveling around Europe or doing business there.
Oh, for sure.
Let's break it down. First off, the EU, the European Union, 27 countries, a real powerhouse, right?
Yeah, huge economic and political force.
Absolutely. But what does it actually mean to be a member, besides just, being part of this big group?
Well, think of it like this really exclusive club. You get special benefits, but you got to play by the rules.
Okay, so like a trade deal kind of thing?
Yeah, it's like a massive free trade zone. Goods, services, capital, it all flows freely between these countries.
Yeah.
But it's not just about economics.
Oh, there's more.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot more. One of the biggest things is free movement of people. You can live, work, study in any of the 27 EU countries without needing a visa or a work permit.
Wow, that's a game changer.
Totally changes things, yeah, for individuals and businesses.
Okay, so it's not just about money. It's like you're a citizen of the whole EU.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. Okay, now the Schengen area, this is the one that always gets me. It doesn't quite match up with the EU, does it?
No, Schengen is all about open borders, no passport control when you're moving between these countries.
So like I could drive from, say, Portugal to Finland and never have to stop at a border.
Pretty much, yeah.
That sounds amazing. But how does that even work if it's not the same as the EU? Who's in, who's out?
All right, so there are 29 countries in Schengen. Most are EU members, but you've got a few like Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, even Liechtenstein that are in Schengen but not in the EU.
So you don't even have to be in the EU to be part of this no borders zone.
Exactly, yeah.
That is so interesting. What about those tiny countries, like the ones completely surrounded by Schengen countries? Do they get some kind of special deal?
Yeah, those are like the microstates, places like San Marino, Vatican City, Monaco, Andorra. They're not technically in Schengen,
Right.
but they're basically functioning as part of it because of where they are.
So they get the benefits without officially being members.
Pretty much. It's like having a really open door policy with your neighbor,
Yeah. Okay, and finally, the Eurozone. This is where the euro comes in. Is this strictly for EU members?
So the Eurozone is made up of 20 EU countries that have adopted the euro as their currency. Makes things simpler for travel, for business, all of that.
Oh, yeah, I can definitely see the appeal, especially if you're going back and forth between different countries.
Oh, yeah. Way easier.
But does everyone in the EU use the euro?
Not everyone, no. Some countries have chosen to keep their own currencies, and that's totally their choice. They're not obligated to switch.
Okay, so it's an option, not a requirement. But here's a weird one. I've heard there are countries outside the EU that use the euro. Is that even possible?
Yeah, you're right. There are a few. Those microstates we talked about, Andorra, Monaco, San Marino, Vatican City, they officially use the euro because of special agreements with the EU. And then you've got Kosovo and Montenegro. They actually use it unofficially, even without an agreement.
It's like the euro has its own gravity or something.
Kinda, yeah.
Pulling countries in. So we've got these three things: EU, Schengen, Eurozone, all connected but not the same. And I'm hearing that being a member of one doesn't automatically mean you're in the others. Why wouldn't a country just go all in?
Well, every country has its own reasons. Economics, politics, history, all of that plays into it. Some might not be ready to integrate that fully. Others might prioritize relationships with countries outside the EU, like Ireland and the UK, for example.
It's all about finding that balance between joining the club and doing your own thing.
Yeah, and it's not like these decisions are set in stone. Countries are always reevaluating, thinking about joining, or even leaving. It's constantly changing, just like Europe itself.
So we've got the basics, but now I'm even more curious about those special cases. Like, what's the story with those microstates? And what about the countries that are kind of on the fence about joining things?
Yeah, let's get into it. Those microstates are really something else. Like Andorra, up in the mountains between Spain and France.
Yeah.
They've been using the euro officially since 2012, but they're not even in the EU.
It's like they're getting the perks without the full membership.
Yeah.
But why not just join the EU? Wouldn't it be easier?
Well, joining the EU is a pretty big deal. It changes a lot for a country, laws, economics, even their identity in a way.
Right.
And for these really small states, keeping their own identity, their independence, that's super important to them.
Makes sense.
And with the agreements they have now, They get a lot of the good stuff, like using the euro, open borders, without having to fully commit.
So they're kind of getting the best of both worlds.
Exactly, finding that balance.
Are there any downsides, though, to being in this kind of in-between zone?
That's a good question. I mean, they do benefit a lot from these arrangements, but they also don't have a direct say in EU policies that might affect them.
Oh, I see.
Like, they don't get to vote in the European Parliament, for example.
So it's a trade-off. Okay, let's talk about Cyprus. They're in the EU, they use the euro, but they're not part of Schengen. What's going on there?
Cyprus is a tricky one. It's because of the whole political situation, the island being divided.
Right.
Since the 74, you've got the Republic of Cyprus, which is an EU member in the south, and then the northern part, which most countries don't even recognize as a separate country.
Yeah.
So trying to figure out Schengen borders with that going on is a real challenge.
So basically, until that gets sorted out, Schengen's not really an option.
It's the big obstacle, yeah. But they are making progress, In 2023, they got access to the Schengen Information System,
Okay.
which is a big deal. It's like this database for security and border stuff. So that's a good sign.
Sounds like they're serious about joining, even with all the complications.
Yeah, they're working on it.
All right, now Ireland. They chose to stay out of Schengen completely. Why would a country so connected to the EU do that?
Well, Ireland has a really strong connection to the UK historically and culturally.
Yeah.
And their priority is the Common Travel Area Agreement, the CTA,
Okay.
which is this agreement between them that lets people travel freely, even live in either country without a passport.
Oh, interesting.
And that agreement is way older than the EU or Schengen, so it goes way back.
So they're sticking with that long-standing bond instead of going further with the EU integration. But doesn't that create problems with border control, especially with Brexit and everything?
It definitely adds a layer of complexity. I mean, Ireland still has its own border controls, but they work really closely with the UK on security stuff.
Yeah.
It just goes to show how these historical relationships can really complicate things, even with regional integration efforts.
Yeah, Europe's got a lot of history woven into all of this. All right, so we've talked about the special cases. But what about the countries that are kind of waiting to join the Eurozone? What's in it for them, and what are the challenges they face?
Well, for countries that are already doing a lot of business with the Eurozone, joining can be really advantageous.
How so?
It can boost trade, lower costs for businesses, and even attract more foreign investment.
So it's all about economic stability and being more connected.
Exactly. But there's a flip side. When you adopt the euro, you lose some control over your own money.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, you can't just adjust interest rates or the value of your currency anymore to deal with specific problems in your own economy. And that loss of flexibility can be a big worry for some countries.
So it's kind of a balancing act, weighing the potential benefits against losing some of your own control.
Exactly. Yeah.
So which countries are actually thinking about joining the Euro Club then?
Well, Bulgaria seems to be the closest. They've been working towards it, and they're aiming for 2025.
Wow, so soon. What do they have to do before they can actually switch over?
They've got to meet these things called convergence criteria. It's basically like a set of economic targets to make sure they're stable and aligned with the rest of the Eurozone.
Okay.
Things like keeping inflation down, managing their debt, having stable exchange rates, and interest rates that are similar to other Eurozone countries.
So it's like proving you can handle the euro before you're allowed in.
Pretty much, yeah.
But that must be tough, especially with how unpredictable the economy is these days.
Oh, yeah. It takes a lot of work, a lot of political will to push through reforms and make it happen. It's a tough balancing act for sure.
So Bulgaria's not alone, right? What about other countries like Romania, Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary? Are they all on the Euro track too?
It's a mixed bag. Romania is actively working towards it, but they're facing similar challenges to Bulgaria, trying to meet those criteria.
Right.
The Czech Republic's been a bit more hesitant. Their public is kind of split on whether giving up their own currency is a good idea or not.
So it's not just the economics, it's about convincing the people too.
Yeah, for sure.
What about Poland and Hungary? They've seemed pretty resistant to the euro, haven't they?
Yeah, they've both expressed concerns about losing control over their own monetary policy, and some of their leaders see keeping their own currencies as a way of showing their independence.
So there's a political element to it as well.
Healthy.
And then there's Sweden. They voted against the euro way back in 2003. Have they changed their minds at all?
It's still a divisive issue there. Some people see the economic benefits and like the idea of being more integrated with Europe,
Yeah.
but others are worried about losing control over their money. If they ever do decide to adopt the euro, they probably have another referendum. Let the people decide.
So ultimately, it's up to each country and its people to decide if the euro is right for them.
Absolutely.
But we've covered a lot of ground here, the EU, Schengen, the Eurozone. It's complicated. What would you say are the most important things for our listeners to take away from all this?
I think the biggest thing is that none of this is set in stone. Europe's constantly changing, and these systems are changing right along with it. Countries are joining, thinking about joining, even leaving. It's all based on what's going on in their own countries and their own priorities.
And it's not just about abstract ideas. It affects people's everyday lives. Free movement, economic opportunities, shared values, it's all connected to these structures we've been talking about.
For sure.
So whether our listeners are planning a trip to Europe or just trying to understand the news, what's the key thing we want them to remember?
I think the key is remembering that Europe's this incredibly diverse place with all these different histories and cultures and goals. Understanding how the EU, Schengen, and the Eurozone all fit together, it helps us understand how complex European integration really is and how it affects the rest of the world.
It's a story that's still being written, a story of unity and diversity, cooperation and competition, all happening at the same time. And the most interesting part is that it's not over yet.
Yeah.
New things are happening all the time, so it's an invitation to keep learning and engaging with this constantly changing landscape.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions.
Until next time.